Shabbat Shalom. I hope the preparations for Passover are not too challenging. And I'm certain that the very thought of spending the Passover nights together with our families, our children, our friends, is enough to make us forget about all the effort we put into preparing for this beautiful holiday. I look forward to spend it with you now that the COVID restrictions have been relaxed somewhat. Last year we were in a completely different spot. And life goes on. And I think we're going to have an amazing Chag. Okay, a little insight on the Parasha of this week, which deals with the sacrifice. It's a very big topic, and I don't think that we will do justice in just a few minutes to flesh out, to figure out, to elaborate on the relevance of the sacrifices to a modern day and age. And believe me, they're very relevant. But nevertheless, I want to focus a little bit on one specific insight, which we find in the very specific language that is employed by the Torah relating to different specific sacrifices. The first few chapters deal with the Korban Nedava, an offering of thanksgiving. After this, it moves on to a Korban Chatat and Korban Hasham. There's a sin offering, a guilt offering. In discussing these sacrifices, which are an obligation, the Torah begins with the offering of the high priest for a sin that was committed unintentionally. And the Torah says, Ima kohen Mashiach yecheta. If the high priest sins. It uses the word im, if. When it deals with a sin that was committed by the congregation as a whole, based on instructions they received from the Sanhedrin, that we're mistaken, and so now the whole congregation has to bring a sacrifice. It uses the word ve'im kol adat Yisrael yishgu, if the congregation will sin. Again, the word if. And then when it deals with the sin of a lone individual, it says ve'im nefesh achat techeta, if an individual will commit an unintentional sin. So which means to say, it's not always that you sin. Sometimes you could sin, sometimes you don't sin. But then when it comes to a prince, when it comes to a king, the Torah says, Asher nasi yecheta, when the king will sin. When? That means to say, definitely he will sin. Question is, when is he going to sin? And that's interesting because we see so often great people who make a huge mistake and they compromise 40, 30, 40 years of hard work and great achievements because of one fleeting temptation. Somehow this temporary pleasure distorts their mind to the extent that they're willing to give it all away. And you ask yourself, how is this possible? Now, we know, of course, that this has got nothing to do just with great people. We all have these moments when we make wrong choices, all of us. And the question is, why is it that we're not able to exert control over our own selves to the extent that we can always see the forest from the trees? We could always make this distinction between what is good and what is bad. And the answer to that is very simple. Our negative inclination will make us see things that are bad as good things. It's going to paint a picture that is so beautiful, right? Where you actually convince yourself that it's actually worth it to go ahead. Right? We tell ourselves, okay, enjoy. No one's going to catch you. No one's going to know. Whatever. The tactics there are really, really efficient. Right? They work. The Baal Shem Tov actually elaborated a bit on this. He says that will come the day when Hashem is going to do away with the negative inclination, with the Yetzer Hara. And the Baal Shem Tov asks, he says, why is it that the Yetzer Hara is going to be punished? For what reason? The Yetzer Hara did its job. It was commended to tempt us, to challenge us, and was quite good at it. So why is it liable? Baal Shem Tov answers, he says, you know why? Because the Yetzer Hara masqueraded and passed itself as something it's not. The Yetzer Hara pretends to be this angel, this pious person who's coming and telling you to do things that are good things. It's actually good for you. For instance, it will say to you, don't give charity today, because tomorrow you'll give twice as much. Don't go to shul and daven with a minyan, because you'll be able to sleep some more, and you'll be able to daven with more concentration. You'll be able to meditate more, and so on and so forth. So you see, it took a mandate that it doesn't have. Now, if the Yetzer Hara comes to you and says, look, whatever it is, this temptation here is bad. Okay, I tell you now it's bad, but it's worth it. It's poison, but this enjoyment is so amazing, it's worth taking the poison. Now, if the Yetzer Hara tells us that, okay, that's a different story, but that's not what it does, and for that it's held liable. And that's why Hashem is going to punish one day the Yetzer Hara. I'd like to share with you a story that happened between the two holy brothers, Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhensk and Rabbi Zusha Vanipoli, discussing, a few things. And Rabbi Zusha says to his brother, Adam had a very, very holy soul. A soul that was an all-encompassing soul. A soul that comprised the soul of every individual which will ever live on the face of the earth. And so he says, I don't get it. How is it that you, my holy brother, that you were not able to tell Adam Arishon, don't do the sin of the tree of knowledge? Why weren't you able to convince him that it was the wrong thing to do? And his answer, fascinating answer, he says to him, my brother, if Adam wouldn't have sinned, we would have had this lingering thought until the end of times, which is, what have we missed? I wish I would know about the taste of sin, what it feels like. So now that Adam sinned, we know the consequences. We know the impact, the huge negative impact. And so I'm going to go on the heel of this insight of the Baal Shem Tov. I'm going to share with you a fascinating commentary of Nachmanides, of the Ramban, about the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Nachmanides focuses on those words about Eve, and how she actually came to convince herself, to talk herself into eating of the fruit. She said, "Vatere Aisha ki tov ha'etz lema'achal." She saw that the tree was appetizing, the fruit was a good fruit. V'chi ta'avahu la'inayim, and it's actually pleasant to the sight. V'nechmad ha'etz le'askil, and it is also magnificent, it's also pleasant for us to reflect and to contemplate. So it's good for the intellect. And the question is, the Ramban says, why is it that the Torah elaborates so much about the nature of this fruit. Why is it important to tell me all these words? And he says that what happened there is that Eve saw the fruit, and she saw a beautiful fruit. And she said to herself, you know something? If this fruit looks so good, it means to say that it is good. It must be. Because looks don't lie. Reality doesn't lie. She could not entertain the idea that the Yetzer Hara would lie. That your evil inclination would actually lie to you. She lived in a reality prior to sin where you could recognize good for what it was and bad for what it was. And she didn't perhaps completely identify this idea that something can be bad and can look good. And I think this is the problem that we experience. When we have in front of us two choices between something that is good and something that is bad, and sometimes what is bad looks good and what is good looks bad. If Eve can make this mistake, according to Nachmanides, so how much more so with us? We're definitely prone to making this mistake. Hashem doesn't change his mind. Yes, it looks good. But how can you overcome this superficial impression? You can overcome it by reminding yourself that Hashem says it's bad. So even though it looks good, it must be bad. And that is easier said than done. For us to come to this realization, it's very, very tough. And so the two tips in how to make the right choices is, first of all, to remember that what is bad remains bad. Doesn't make a difference how it looks like. And number two, when a person wants to do something good and his mind presents to him some sort of an obstacle, if what you want to do is the good thing to do, don't let your mind play games on you. Anything which is an obstacle to do something good comes from your negative inclination, and therefore must be stopped. The challenge of dealing with our negative inclination is going to go on with us for many of us until we die. Only a tzaddik, only a perfectly upright person like Moses doesn't have a negative inclination. And so this ties really with the holiday of Passover, with Pesach, because the whole point of the Exodus of Yetziat Mitzrayim is to go out of Mitzrayim, which, as we know, the word Mitzrayim in Hebrew is made of the same letters as Mitzarim, is the word for boundaries and constraints, to go out of our constraints and our limitations. That's the idea of Passover. And that's not just something that happened 3,000 years ago. That's something that's happening this very moment, this very second. And this is a lifelong struggle, but we know that we have the ultimate recipe to prevail. We have our holy Torah, we have Hashem that stands by us, that helps us, that gives us the push that we need at the moment that we need. And because of this, we know that ultimately we'll have the upper hand. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.